Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 67. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, sitting in my desk chair, and across the table in the same room in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, we have Mike Zocco. Mike, what's up, man?
Joe, how are you doing today? I appreciate the pronunciation of Zocco. Like I said, we're stateside, so it's Zocco, but if we were in Tuscany, it would be Zocco.
This is so weird. So this is the first in-person podcast I've recorded for the Project Endure podcast. Done a couple in-person episodes in the past for the Pursuit. But this is going to take a little getting used to. Normally there's, miles and miles of distance between me and the guest. And now there is maybe a foot and a half, maybe less. And so I think the energy is going to be different with this one, but like I start most podcasts, I would love for you to just introduce yourself to the listeners.
So thank you, Joe. So my name is Mike. I would define myself as a competitor, a friend, a student, a teacher, a son, and just somebody who tries to be their most authentic self all the time. I am from a small town in northern New Jersey, about 20 minutes outside Manhattan. It's just basically a way of saying that you're from New York City without saying you're from New York, because you're actually not from New York City. And yeah, I'm. It's crazy how we connected. I always say it in areas or spaces like this that we connected completely on accident, and it was crazy. Remember before I started creating content on my actual Instagram and going all in on that. I had a running page, and it was, I think, roughly over a year ago now. And you commented something about, oh, Tom's River, New Jersey. I love that place, or something along the lines of, I used to go to the beach there. And I was like, yeah, it's a great place. And I found your page, started looking at it. I'm like, geez, this guy's content I kind of connect with. And let me give it a follow. And I remember vividly on the brink of figuring out what I want to do coaching wise. And I just reached out to you. I was like, hey, got a minute? You want to talk? Want to chat? I'm thinking about getting a coach for running. And I actually was. So in Philadelphia, I remember sitting down. I was in Fairmount at the time, visiting one of my friends and taking this call. And it was super intentional. And I knew that the biggest thing for me was to connect with somebody that was on very much the similar cadence, because I never had a coach before in my entire life that was, I guess, personal or one-on-one personal programming until then. So you were the first person and only person that I reached out to, and I did that intentionally, and it worked out. So I feel like I have a decent gauge on myself.
It's interesting to hear the other side of it, because when we connected first on the phone, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people about coaching, and you can tell how prepared different people are on the other end of the phone. And I got the sense that you had done all of your homework, that you had talked to 10, 15, 20 coaches, and that you were comparing everything I was saying to everything you had heard from others. I just got this sense because of your passion. And I've since come to know and love your passion for everything that you care about, whether it's running, people, connection, endurance, encouragement, the work that you do at your 9 to 5, and then everything outside. And it's so interesting to look back and see how our friendship has grown all through a single comment on social media. And since then, we've gone on runs together. You've been to my old apartment. You've been to this house multiple times. You're sitting in my office, and it's amazing how the world of social media can bring people together. And so, Mike, I want to dive in with the first big question. And I know this is going to take us probably a few different places, or at least it can, but I've never asked you this. What's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle in life? So, a circumstance that you didn't get to choose for yourself.
So obviously, I've been an avid listener of this podcast. Um, when I was when in my reflection spaces more recently, I really thought hard about all of these answers, but just making it as honest as possible. I think I know that everything that I try to do is with that intention. So I'd say to answer that question would be finding just general self worth. Mainly from growing up in I would say unique environment, but an environment where a lot of people grow up in, but no one really talks about or wants to open up about it. So before I kind of jump into what that exactly is, I want to preface it with this. Life is beautiful. And I know that is because I took it for granted for a long, long time, especially growing up. And for anybody that's listening, you know that a lot of people will tell their stories and find the good out of everything. And that's great. But I want to overemphasize that because I want whatever I speak about today to hopefully resonate with somebody, and hopefully you take away something hopefully positive. But I need to preface that life is incredibly beautiful. So I grew up from and a father that was an immigrant from Italy. So my dad was born in a small little beach town in Pozzallo, Sicily. So southern Sicily, and they immigrated here in the 70s for a better life, and they achieved that, and which is awesome, and it holds something dear to my heart. And I know a lot of people who are first generation. Their parents aspire towards that, and they work very hard, and they have this crazy work ethic that I call crazy because I think it's crazy. But um, yeah, my family, my dad's side came here and they achieved that American dream. When I was younger, I still remember it. So my grandfather and my dad got into the textile industry. So essentially, it's just like textiles that are the fabrics for most of your clothing. He would design, I remember like dresses, I guess textiles for dresses. And I remember I was a little kid going to the factory, walking down the aisles, and he'd be like, make sure you're not touching any of the machines. And I just thought it was a very normal thing. And I lived in an environment that where I was more privileged than most, and I acknowledge that. From a financial standpoint and just from things that I wanted, I know I was entitled, and I think I'm not a parent. Well, maybe in the future, hopefully in the future, when the time comes, but I know that's your dream to give your kids. But I definitely had a entitlement mindset at a very, very young age. Um, and with all of that, being a kid and not really understanding how things work to the fullest extent, and thinking things are very much linear. And I think when I was about 8 years old, my parents divorced, and at the same time, a lot of chaos ensued where we had everything, but we also lost everything when it came to businesses and um, just overall, I guess, more financial comfort and well being. While all this was going on, being a kid that had no idea what was going on. I grew up as an only child. I have a very, very small family, and I couldn't understand why things were happening. I couldn't compartmentalize it. I thought that everything that was going on was because of me. And I want to talk about things that I did with my actions. I absolutely love my parents to death. They are humans are imperfect, and I never want to say anything hurtful or any that way. I want to talk more about the things that I could have controlled, and what I endured. So when I would say beginning of middle school, so you're like that fifth grade age, I started to kind of come to more of a realization of the things that were happening and why they were unfolding, and that's irrelevant to the story. But all I knew at that time is I was somebody who was very animated, like I am today, but I was I was so sad inside. I thought that everything going up to it was my fault. I felt like the situation wasn't communicated properly because I don't know. It just I think parents at the time, like, they're just trying to figure it out themselves and they don't know how to go about certain situations. But I took it personally, and I was pissed off. I wanted to make sure that nobody knew what I was going through. So I would I put on for most of my early life a mask, and I masked everything, Joe. I was good at it too. And it's kind of scary that I'm saying this with confidence, but I was so angry and frustrated at the world because of how I was growing up. And I grew up in an environment where I knew people were in the same situation as me, but no one talked about it. No one still talks about it to this day, which is a very common thing within society, but no one does. And I was frustrated. I was mad. I was super angry, but I never took it out on anybody. And I was thankful for a lot of things that were surrounded in my life at the time, with friends and sport. Also, I played soccer growing up, and that was probably my first passion. Just it was introduced to me from my dad and my grandfather. And you know, unfortunately, Italy's not in the World Cup this year, but we're pretty good at soccer. Subtle flex, but anyways, I was growing up not understanding that concept, and during that time, I moved about 12 places growing up, and I didn't want to be in this situation. And I even to this day, I apologize to my mom. My mom and I would buck heads like crazy because all I thought is it was just at the time, I thought it was her fault. Thought it was her fault and everything that she did. And I still to this day feel so guilty for the things that I put her through, and the way that I acted towards her, because my mom is my person. And she is the most independent and strong person that I have ever met in my entire life. And I look up to her, and I took that for granted at a really early age. And I'm happy to say now that we have a great relationship. But I was incredibly frustrated with her, just because she was the only person that I was surrounded with that I could. I didn't feel comfortable opening up to my friends or anything like that. Um, and no one I felt like could relate to it. So when I was about, I think at this time, I remember in grades, I don't know, not ages, but I was in seventh grade, and this was to the pinnacle of my frustration, my anger, my sadness. I was just going through the motions, and school was like my only safe haven, I felt like, because then I was coming back home to an environment that I really didn't want to be fully in. Um, and I told my mom that I didn't want to be here anymore. And I don't think she knew what to say when I told her. And I still remember this to this day, where we were out eating and we were at a restaurant. I told her right there out of frustration. And I I was just lost. I felt incredibly alone. And that feeling is something that I never want anyone to feel. And for myself, never want to feel like that again. And luckily enough, like I had a good support system that more was just an empty threat, but was just something that I had no idea how to express. And I thought that was the only way of expressing it. And luckily enough, like I said, I had a really good support system, and I had some friends that had no idea what was going on. And I'm so grateful for them, and I'm still friends with them to this day. And they know some of this, and hopefully, if they do listen to this, I love you guys so much. So if you fast forward a little bit to high school at this point, um, this is when I started to fully form who I was a little bit more and be more conscious of my surroundings. I was still somebody who was wearing that mask, but I luckily enough had somebody that was going through something similar with me. And I was to the point of I needed to figure out who I was, but I still had no idea. I had zero clue of who Mike was. So what I did was I did what the crowd wanted, and I did things when it came to partying, drinking, um, spending time with crowds or people that maybe no, I shouldn't say maybe. What I knew I shouldn't be surrounding myself with. I started losing my passion for soccer. Um, I ditched my friends that were my support system during the hardest time of my life. And around when I was like 16 years old, developed a little bit of a substance abuse problem when it came to nicotine. I remember I was at a party and I got introduced to the little pouches, and it may sound, this is the biggest thing too. It may sound so minuscule just because it's so normalized, but I found it, and I remember the first time I tried, I threw right up, but I got this like numbing sensation that took me away from everything. And I in retrospect, I take accountability for putting myself in that situation and the people that I'm around, but that's what I did. I did it. And it only spiraled a lot more where with that it created worse habits of me lying, being manipulative. Um and like my parents at this time, they had their own places, but my mom was seeing somebody else. And I remember I would lie to my dad and be like, "Hey, I'm staying at my mom's house." And I would lie to my mom saying, "Hey, I'm staying at his house." And I would just like screw everybody. I'm doing what I want to do. And when I got a car, it was even worse too. Um, and I handled a lot of situations in a very immature way. I hurt a lot of people that I still feel guilty to this day from having and being that type of person, being that type of Mike that I never want to be again. Um, and I've made amends with some of those people and things that I've done, um, and some that I haven't. And I hopefully I can get around that to that point in life, which I slowly have, which makes me happy. But all of that just amplified, and I continued to indulge. I continued to do and create negative habits for myself. I was just full blown addicted to nicotine at like a 16, 17-year-old kid. And it was just to hide all of my insecurities. I remember I was like a short kid at the time. And like from physically to internally, I just thought I was so ugly. Um, but no one knew. And it scares me to still say absolutely no one knew how much I was going through. And I didn't feel comfortable talking. There's a thing just with the way that I was grown up, and I try to, the biggest thing that I've learned and gotten really good at now is just perspective taking. I think that's one of the most underrated skills that somebody can have. Leaders need to have perspective taking in order to work with people, because people have different experiences and are affected in different ways. Um, and I didn't have that. I didn't. So if we get to the point, I was a good student. I just kind of got her. I was basically average at school when it was in high school, and I hated some subjects, but I excelled in other things that I really liked. I would go all in at, and that's just my personality now. So I went to school, and I went to school in Philadelphia, and I wanted to get away so badly from home life, and I saw this as an opportunity to be unapologetically Mike. And I told myself in that moment, that I'm going to fully prioritize me. And when I went to school, I completely disconnected from all of that. And the issue that I did, or issue that I, and I shouldn't say issue, the mistake I made was that I was unapologetically Mike, but in the most destructive way possible. Um, from just not prioritizing the things that I wanted to prioritize and more overemphasizing the partying and surrounding myself sometimes with people that I shouldn't have surrounded myself with because it wasn't who Mike was. Um, I always feel like I want to know your opinion on this. I always feel like I'm a chameleon. I still feel to this day. I feel like I can talk to a brick wall, and I'm not sure if I'm fully comfortable with that, but I I'm always able to talk to somebody and connect with some people. And there are people that I really want to connect with, and there's people that I feel like I'm just bullshitting. And I definitely did a lot of that when I was younger. But luckily, I made strides to get to that point. And my freshman year of college was still destructive. I had a very bad relationship with both of my parents, and I did not take any accountability for my actions. And at this point, my health wasn't good. I was incredibly out of shape. I still didn't know who Mike was. And this is the most common theme for everything. And I did not take accountability. I always pointed the finger. And I pointed the finger because I was scared. And I pointed the finger because I was pissed off. Um, and all I needed to do was just take accountability. And my sophomore year came around and it was probably the peak of just my substance abuse when it came to nicotine. I remember too this vividly when I was a sophomore. This was like the height of like the vape phase, and I I would go through so many of those like little pods a day, and I was going to an internship, and I I lost my vape, and I freaked out. I panicked. And I remember I had to drive before someone was picking me up. I literally drove to the gas station, bought another one, and then came back. And my roommate was like, I found it. And everything started to sit in with me that this is a problem. Um, and those similar feelings that I had when I was a kid started to approach, and nobody knew. Um, and at this point, I felt like I was in the deepest hole where I needed to figure out and just take grips to my habits and take accountability from, or else I don't know where I'm gonna go or who I'm gonna be or become. Um, and I don't believe in searching for these light bulb moments or these eye opening moments, but I had a couple of them happen during that time that I'm incredibly thankful for. I met some really great people, still friends to this day that I opened up to and related. We have such a still a stigma of being vulnerable in spaces, even within friends or groups, especially not online, that I needed to learn how to connect with my emotions to be able to move forward. And in October of 20, I guess at this time, 2017, there was this service program at the school I attended. And the service program is called Apex. And essentially, it's a community program that works with communities among Appalachia. And you work with and for others. And it was a big thing at my school, huge, right? Everybody did it. And what does Mike do? Mike follows the crowd. So what did I do? I was like, I'm going to sign up for this. Like there's huge hype behind it. I'm going to try it. And I signed up for it in October, and this was still the height of everything of me not taking accountability for my actions and my habits and surrounding myself with the right people that I should be surrounding myself with. And March of, I guess at this time, 2018 comes around. I'm like, oh, I forgot. I completely forgot I signed up for this. To be totally frank, I was never a service person. I went to a Catholic school, and growing up, religion was a big part of my house. And I have a complicated relationship with religion. I should preface that. That's totally okay. Um, but at the time, my relationship with religion, like it was kind of mutual. I was like, oh, like I'm Catholic, but I don't really do anything. So I was like, oh, this is a neat thing I should try. I think my dad would be proud of me. So I had the opportunity to go to a community called St. Paul, Virginia. And for anybody who's like on the fence of or has like this weird negative connotation about service where it's like, oh, you're only going there because you think you're gonna help and change something. No, that's not the case. Service is not about that. Service is working with and for others and creating relationships. That's what service is. Don't expect to go to somewhere to fix everyone's problems because chances are they don't want you to, right? But we are more similar um than we are different. But you can learn a lot from people. So I went there with the most, I guess, open mind that I ever had because I told myself I was like, this if this isn't something that can spark anything, and I was searching for that light bulb moment, and I don't know why, but I was desperate. I was desperate, Joe. And we go on this trip and we get greeted by a community net member. To this day, I stay in touch with because he means so much to me. A guy named Jerry Couch. Now, Jerry grew up in St. Paul, and he loved his community, grew up, raised his family there, and then he went to a different part of Virginia because of his job, and he felt this calling from God to come back to St. Paul to work with the community. This community, so a lot of communities in Appalachia, it's different, but this was a coal mining community, and obviously a lot of things have shifted away from that, from renewable energy and things like that. So the industry's completely gone. I shouldn't say completely gone, but it's not like it used to be. And a lot of those areas have been exploited, and there's a lot to research there, and I highly encourage people to look into it. Um, but Jerry spoke with such passion and such optimism about people and life that I compare him to like a modern day Socrates. He was this big guy that was full of love and he didn't have to. And he had so many reasons to give up. Um, and he chose to come back to this small town to help. And I'm like, okay, there's maybe something here. This is Mike talking during the time. And during this trip, we had a lot of reflection spaces, and this is the first time I ever sat down with my thoughts and feelings. And I'm grateful for my leaders of the trip and for the community members that I met there. Um, but Jerry was giving us a tour of the old printing press, and when he was doing that, he was talking to me, another participant, and my group leader at the time, and he said something to me that will always stick for the rest of my life. I have these words tattooed on my inner arm. And Jerry spoke, I do not ask God for things, for he knows what I need, so I must listen. And I broke down in that moment because so many things made sense to me. He told me in that moment that I need to listen, and I need to listen to the world. I still at that moment didn't take it in a religious way. I took it as your environment and the people, things, day to day that you surround yourself with, you will become, but it will also tell you so many stories. And in that moment, I had this weird catalyst that, Mike, you need to get your stuff together or else you're not going to make it, and you're not going to fulfill the things that you really wanted to do deep inside. And I didn't know what that was at the time, but I sure as shit knew that it was a better direction than where I was going. Um, and that's exactly what I did. I got involved with a lot more things at school that I still to this day am connected with individuals. And I started to take progressive steps towards who I wanted to become. And it took a while. It took years. We're always developing ourselves, but it took a while to get out of that hole, um, to slowly compound into today, into this current present version of myself. And there are a lot of moments going forward that sparked that little light bulb, but that mindset that he set based off the words that he said in that moment made me just become more of a self-aware person going forward. That was the highlight of what he was trying to tell me and the others in that moment. Listen, when craziness happens, when the stresses of life happen, just listen. It'll give you feedback. It'll whisper in your ear, "Hey, this is what's going on."
Wow. I didn't know a lot about I didn't know a lot of that about you. Um, it's amazing how the question, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to handle, more or less was most of your life to this point, right? From childhood through your teenage years, through your college years, and then in one moment in time, these words from this one person who you'd never met before made everything click. And it's so powerful for a number of reasons. One, there's always hope, right? You can live however many years of your life thinking that you'll never be able to change. Nobody will ever know your pain. Um, at a point, you don't want to be here. And now you have so much passion for life. And there was this one turning point, not to say that was the only thing, but that was something that was pivotal for you. And I think it goes to show the power of words, the power of persistence, the power of luck and happenstance, if you want to call it that, or coincidence, or if you believe in divine intervention or that things are being guided. You were in this place at the right time and you talked to the right person. You listened to the right person. And it's so powerful. And it's really cool to just see the person you've become through that. And I think the important part, not to forget about everything that you just said, is that last part that once you decided it was time to make a change, even though that spark was there, it wasn't like things changed all of a sudden, right? You had to work, you had to show up again and again. And I'm sure it wasn't smooth. I'm sure there were plenty of times where you regressed, even. I'm sure there were moments where you weren't even sure if it was worth it because you still didn't know who you were. And to be honest, I think if we're being honest, none of us, none of us have it all figured out. I don't think any single person on this earth could sit in a chair across the table from me and say, I have it all figured out, and I would believe that person. I just don't think that exists. I think we're all figuring it out all the time. And so I want to thank you for sharing that, Mike. It gives a lot of context for everything. And it kind of begs the question, right? You had a really hard life. Maybe some of that was self inflicted in ways, some of it was circumstance, and you show up now today and you believe in doing hard things. And you would think that, okay, I just made it through this really tough season of life. I'm here. Let me just sit back, relax, enjoy. But you don't. You push yourself physically, you push yourself mentally, you connect, you're vulnerable, you're open, you do all these things that are really challenging for a lot of people. And it begs the question, why? Why do you do those things? So I'll just ask, What is the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose, and why have you done that thing?
So there's a lot there to unpack, but let me know if I'm missing anything. The reason why I have this passion for life is because I knew what it felt like when you didn't, and I'm scared of that. And that lights a fire under me every single day to make sure that I continue to be passionate. I'm the most, I'm not going to say the most. That's a lot. I am so animated and I'm so loud, and I try to find joy in every little thing because there is something there, Joe. Even when you don't see it, you can find it. But it's all up to you if you really want to see it, and your environment and what you consume will hinder that or benefit that. Um, so that's why I have this energy that I always want to be continue to be lit. I feel like I have two sides of me. I have a very very calm, relaxing side, and I also have a high energy side. When I'm in between, I feel like I'm going back and forth, and it feels like there's a little bit of hesitation. So that's when I know I'm not doing something that I should be doing. So that's why I continue to do what I do, and it will always continue, always. To answer your question, the hardest thing that I've ever done on purpose, seriously, was running a marathon, my first ever marathon. And how that got about was take a couple steps back. So I at this point in time in my life, I'm about to graduate. I took a lot of accountability of just getting my grades together. I was about to lose summer scholarships at the time, and just prioritized that. I prioritized a little bit more of my health, even though it wasn't that structured. I was going to the gym. Like I don't know, people who are in college or were in like or out of college. If you went to college, if you go to the training facilities, whatever, and there's just a bunch of people hanging out. It's mostly like social hour. That's what I was kind of there for. I was there for social hour, to lounge, to enjoy, get a little bit of a pump on before going out on a Friday night. That was me. I have no pride. I'm proud of myself, but I have no pride. So I'm very open. I'm okay with admitting that. But anyways, so I'm a senior at this time, and I I get an opportunity to work for this great company. And I am prioritizing relationships with the people that I want to, people that I'm still with this day. I cut out a lot of people that at that time that were unhealthy for me, or they just weren't around for me. That's how I kind of knew and gave me that answer. Sometimes that's the loudest answer that people ignore. Um, Still struggle a little bit with nicotine. I had an on and off relationship with it. Um, but felt like I was a little bit more control, even though that doesn't make sense and that's not real. Looking back at it now. But if we go back to now, let's go fall of 2019, and I'm starting to play soccer. I'm starting to be a little bit more active with my life, but I still felt like I was very comfortable. I think like I thought I was healthy. We're going to the gym, but it was a social hour. But I was not eating right. I was eating like crap. I think I just turned 21 at the time, so that was a big thing. And these are commonalities that I know a lot of people are with. And again, like this is very relatable things that people don't talk about. That blows my mind now to think about it. That this is just like very normal things. Um, and I felt comfortable. I felt so comfortable, even though I just took time for the last 2 years of figuring out stuff. And life goes through peaks and valleys. It's not linear. Progress isn't linear whatsoever. I learned that, and at that time period of my life. So we fast forward, we hit March of 2020. I am a leader on this service trip at the time, and I take my group with me and my wonderful co-leader Mila to St. Paul, Virginia. I have the opportunity to lead a trip to St. Paul, Virginia. And when we're in St. Paul, that is the week. I still remember this. That is the week where the NBA shut down. Everyone started to shut down, travel, things of that nature. That is when we had the alert of what's going on. And they call us back, and When we get called back, we disperse. We have 2 weeks off from school, and they cancel the semester. People are freaking out, up in the arms. It was such a, for me, a blessing and a curse because I know a lot of people were negatively affected by this. But I saw this immediately, Joe, as an opportunity. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so much free time and I have so much autonomy that I haven't had at all. And at the time, I was still living in Philadelphia, living with friends, like living with really good friends. And the last 3 months of school were completely virtual, and I had my own place, but like I had the most autonomy. And I told myself, I was like, gyms are closed. How am I gonna stay active in some sort of way? And I'm like, you know what? Let me go for a run. I haven't casually said that. Maybe at the time, it was probably since high school where I casually wanted to go for a run. And I go for a run for like a 1-2 mile run. And I'm like, I'm itching. I'm like, it's not too bad. I had no idea how to run. I was running at the time like 2 miles, the next day 3 miles, next day 4 miles from somebody who had zero base. And I had the worst shin splints and got injured. But I'm like, there's something here that just sparked my interest. And I think it was partially one, I was forced to because of our unfortunate circumstances. And two, like I I always enjoyed, like I enjoyed playing soccer when I was growing up, and I enjoyed like runner's high is a real thing, and maybe that's like terrible to emphasize, but I fell in love with it quickly. I'm like, I feel great. It was so surface level. I'm like, let me just keep doing this thing. And I remember at the time, and this is something that stuck with me because it's important, where I wanted to purposely run a marathon. I remember right before everything shut down, this person that was very, very much important in my life at the time, I told him, I was like, hey, I want to run a half marathon. I remember I was watching a BPN video. I was watching Nick Bear run his first ever marathon. And I was like, I want to run a half marathon. I had this itch. The person told me, why do you need to sign up for an event to run a half marathon? And that wasn't the point. It was the whole event, the mindset of wanting to do something that I never thought before. And this was a couple months prior, but when I started getting the itch to run, I said, you know what, Mike, I'm going to do something that I thought to myself I would never do. And I thought was crazy, absolutely insane. I never ran probably 3-4 miles before that in consecutive measures. When I played soccer, I played fullback. I played right fullback, and I was a slow guy, but you would not get past me. You would not get past me. I would hold you down, but I was so slow. I was so slow, Joe, and my endurance was terrible. Um, and I remember I signed up. I was like looking online for like a training program. Found one that fit. It was like someone talking to your ear, and I ran my first marathon. I remember this. So it was like April at the time. I'm like, let me run a marathon, and I didn't run it until October of 2020. It's like, well, like a 4 month training block, which is a 5 month training block, which is outrageous, but it was like super consistently. It was controlled chaos, but I tried to follow some kind of plan. And I remember I ran it in 5+ hours, and this was virtual. And I signed up for like the New York City virtual marathon. I still, for some reason, my Strava didn't count. I didn't get the medal for it, but I did it. And some of my friends came there and they supported me at the end, and I ran it like 5+ hours. And right after that moment, Joe, I was like, I have the itch for this. And I'm like, I lost in that process like 25 to 30 pounds. Um, I felt great. I had an opportunity to really control every variable possible at this point. I'm working and I'm post grad, I'm living at home, and I felt like I control my environment, and the marathon was something that I never thought I would do.
Uh, I am so curious when you finished the marathon and it took you 5+ hours and it was the hardest thing you'd ever done, right? This is your answer. And you had an itch to do it again, to run more right away. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so I typically get these feelings after every like big block or big race where I ended and I thought I'd be like so emotional about it because it was such a huge feat for myself and where I was in my personal journey and health journey and mental health journey. And immediately when I stopped, I'm like, I can do this again, but I'm faster than this. Let me do this right. I like was barely drinking like electrolytes. I was barely drinking any water during it. I didn't eat anything during my first marathon. Um, it was completely a mess, but it was this. Let me backtrack. The power of like compounding is real in life and things that you do. And with running, it's especially true where once you hit a mark or hit a checkpoint, you feel like I did this, like I can hit another mark. I can get faster, I can get stronger, I can get more consistent with this because I know that there's an opportunity for it. And a lot of the health effects of it, I think it was is my guider, and it really helped me with dealing with a lot of mental health issues that I was dealing with, a lot of self-doubt, and to go back to like what I said before, like self-worth. Running gives me value, and at the time like I hooked onto it. I was like, this is something that I need in my life, to later figure out, and I've said it more recently than not, just because of things that I've been going with in my own running journey, is that I am not a runner. I'm a competitor, Joe, but I am not a runner. I am someone who loves to run and has a passion. I will never stop running until my body purely doesn't let me. And then I'll probably go to its cousin. I mean, this is probably biking, but that's for 50-year-old Mike to figure out. That is why I continue.
So it resonates with me to be a competitor and not a runner. I think I don't like titles in general. Um, we've talked about titles in Project Endure, and um, titles hold value in specific scenarios. And when I think of myself, I just try and drop the titles. I'm Joe. I'm a human being, and I enjoy competing like yourself. And if running were ever taken away from me, if lifting were ever taken away from me, that would without a doubt get channeled into something else. And I think sometimes the hardest things in life, the hardest scenarios in life are when things get taken away from us and we have to figure out what to do next. And so you and I are having this conversation at a really interesting time. I don't know if you were going to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up. We worked on a training block, right, to get to the Philadelphia Marathon, and the Philadelphia Marathon is in 3 days, 3 days out, and you poured so much into this prep, and it's been uh, a really hard prep for a lot of reasons. And you just made the decision to not run the marathon. And we had conversations behind the scenes, and I know how challenging that was for you. I would just love to hear a little bit about that. And I really, I bring it up because I know so many people out there have dealt, are dealing with, or will deal with something similar, not just in running, but in life, when you put so much into something and you have to make a decision that maybe doesn't let you do that thing.
Yeah, so this is going into our second prep working together, through Project Endure coaching. And I think the biggest thing is if you are serious and looking into to coaching, whether it be like whatever your goal is, but for me, obviously endurance running, your coach needs to be your guide, and you need to understand one another. It's you have to act as like a relationship. And that was the biggest thing when I reached out to you, was finding that mesh and that guide, and I knew it through seeing your content. Like it's your gut feeling. I knew it.
I need to say that is so true, the relationship aspect of coaching. And I just want to say that when Mike texts me, I can see, when you get a text, you can see the first couple lines of a text. And just by the first couple lines, I know if what kind of mood Mike is in, whether it's super, super high, super, super low, or somewhere in the middle. We just know each other that well. And I just wanted to add that in there because it just makes me smile.
It's definitely true. Um, so to answer your question before, the things that I've been going with, so this prep has not gone to plan. It has been the most chaotic prep out of all of them. Um, and it's very much relatable to what I said before of not identifying as a runner. And I think that's something that I I recommend to anybody who does something specifically. You are that character trait that makes you want to do whatever you're doing. So related to Philly, I was dealing with a little bit of adductor strain about 8, 9 weeks ago at this point. Um, Rehabbed it, came back too fast, um, re-injured another, like basically my ankle and another part of my body, basically building up mileage too quickly. And it was definitely a struggle because I felt like I was maintaining or trying to maintain health, but also needing to progress and not hitting the marks that I was hitting after hitting so many marks. And this was going so well before. And I'm like, I'm controlling everything I can control, but I'm not getting healthy. And this is how my mind operates. And luckily enough, that guy, Joe, was there every step of the way of just communicating with him constantly. And that's what I did, and that's what we did. And got to the point where this past weekend I had to figure out this is it, right? I've exhausted everything. I've rehabbed, I've prioritized recovery, um, eating, sleep, like everything you could think of. And I really was prioritizing and making time for it. And I knew that going into this race. And I ran it this weekend as a top 10 mile in Philadelphia. And it felt like I never ran before in my entire life. And it was the most upsetting and frustrating thing that I have experienced with this relationship with this sport. And I remember in that moment, I knew, and I texted you right after, just being frustrated. And and I think about it now, you probably have never seen that side of me or even that text. I was fully pissed off. I was so frustrated. And even the week before when I tried to run my 18 miler and after 5 miles, my calf tightened up. I remember this. I remember being at I went to my happy place, which is by the beach of the Jersey Shore. Shout out Lava Land, New Jersey. Love that place. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I ran 5 miles. I should say this. I ran 5 miles in the morning. Calf tightened up. I couldn't walk. Stopped, went home, and then I went down there, went to go run again with nobody around, by myself, controlling everything I could control. And the same thing happened again. I remember I chucked my water bottle. I I was upset. I started crying. And in that moment, I had to walk 2 miles back to my car because I literally parked it. That's neither here nor there. Anyways, I did a long walk and I felt so alone in that moment. But my maturity and of who I've developed now handled that in a very healthy and productive way where I just keep everything so because it feels so much lighter on my shoulders, Joe. And I was able to express that to you. We go into the 10 miler and that happens. And I think I still deal with some things that are probably not the best, but I deal with them better. As long as you're progressing as a person and doing things that maybe you were doing in a negative way in the past, a little bit better, that's progress. I'll take it. We'll get there. Aim for perfection. Don't expect it. I try not to. And you have to feel though. You can't ignore. And that's just something that I used to do when I was younger, is just ignore problems, bottle them up. But I'd rather burst out in frustration of emotion and passion because it tells myself and it's affirming that I care. I care. Um, and social media has given me a really great outlet to express it because I know a lot of similar people go through the same thing. So in that moment, I was very mad. I luckily went to go see some friends that were there and were supportive. But after that, I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody, and I went home and talked to my mom, who's again guiding light, super supportive, super strong. knows how I can operate with running, and she was shocked at first when I started this journey. She's like, I know you're serious about this because I know how much commitment and time and priority you put to it. And the next day, I then we had our coaching call. No, we had it 2 days later. So this is a Sunday. On Sunday, I was driving back up to northern New Jersey, like right outside. And I had the most peace of mind I ever had in the last 60 to, I guess, 60 to 70 days. I felt like now I can fully focus on prioritizing health, prioritizing recovery. I have a new goal, which is totally fine. I'm not running for the next 2 weeks now, and I'm totally okay with that. It's gonna shift, and that is the most healthiest way I think as an athlete you can handle those types of situations is acknowledging that you've done everything in your control to try to fix a situation. In this case, it's an injury. But when you have to pivot, you have to pivot. When you have to cut your losses, you got to know when. And that was me. And it felt so much. I felt so much lighter, Joe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean there's a lot there. The one thing I want to highlight is that it's good to feel emotion. There are people out there, and Mike, you even said you've been through a season of this where you were just looking to be numb, right? I think we're designed to feel emotion. We're designed to feel happy, excited, joyful, and angry, frustrated, sad. Those things are okay to feel. I would even argue it's good to feel those things from time to time and to be open about them and to not avoid them and not suppress them. And it's just so powerful to, yeah, to understand that you can't have the highs without the lows. You can't have the ups without the downs. You can't have the sweet without the bitter. It's just life. And that's part of what makes it beautiful. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes it beautiful. And, life is a long game. What you did, in my opinion, was make an intelligent decision to put your long term running and competitive goals over a short term, maybe difficult decision, right? You could have ran the Philadelphia Marathon. It would have just been suffering for the sake of suffering. Wouldn't have gone the way we had hoped. It would have just hurt. It would have set you back in a physical sense. And that's not what we needed. And, that's part of endurance is knowing when to slow down, knowing when to pull back, knowing when to say, hey, now is not the time because I need to be 100% later on. So when you hear the word endurance, Mike, what comes to mind for you?
So I wrote this down because I thought a lot about this, and I told myself I could come up with like a definition for it and like have something certainly defined, but uh, it took a little bit to kind of realize like what actually endurance means to me. And I through actually last night I was thinking about this a lot more. I got into a little bit more yoga classes, mostly for the stretching at first, but the stillness definitely helps. I highly recommend. But endurance to me is the sustainable necessity of life that invokes the human condition, a condition which produces two outcomes that lead to growth: beauty or sadness, both of which aren't finite.
Can you read that one more time?
So endurance to me is a sustainable necessity of life that invokes the human condition, a condition that produces two outcomes that lead to growth. Those outcomes are beauty or sadness, both of which aren't finite.
Wow. I don't know what comes to mind for me when I hear that. The first thing that popped into my head was a seed being planted underground. Surprise, for anybody listening. Um, Beauty and sadness, and both lead to growth. The reason a seed comes to mind is because when a seed is planted underground, if a seed was had consciousness, it could very well think it was buried and feel sad. It has to fight through the resistance of the soil to get above the surface. And that's hard, but eventually it finds the sun. Eventually it blossoms. There's beauty there above the surface. And maybe the sadness is below the surface. I'm so curious for you. Like, what does that mean? If you had to tell me without reading that, what does that mean to you? I am so curious.
I think the human condition is underrated. And what I mean by that is the human condition is imperfect, but it's such a roller coaster of experiences and emotions. But that's what makes life worth living. And endurance is, I think, just living life, you're enduring. Living life, you're enduring. And in a weird way, and I'll explain, I never want to be fully, if I'm always happy all the time, there's a problem. If I'm always sad all the time, there's a problem, right? And I need to acknowledge that. But when I'm enduring, right, whether it be with life, I guess personal things, athletic adventures that I'm trying to accomplish, it's this it's a temporary feeling of happiness, sadness, like beauty and sadness, right? There's high ups, these downs, but that's why endurance is so special, is so important. And that's why I love life, is because one moment you can be incredibly happy about something like something happening, and one thing you can be incredibly disappointed, like I just was with my injury. But I'm growing, and I'm going to give that a big hug. So, in a nutshell, that's what endurance means to me.
I love that. I was having a conversation with a client about, I believe it's called patina. If you're a car person and you just heard me butcher that, I apologize. But I think, from my understanding, it's when a car has almost it's rust or it looks like rust. And for people who collect vintage cars, it can be a really desirable thing. And to me, right before I knew this, I would walk by a car on the street that is patinaed or has patina, I'm not sure, and just think, it's rusted. But it gives it character. And people love that. People love character. And it's the same, it's the same for things like that stuffed animal that you had as a kid that you still have as a teenager, except you're not proud to share that anymore. But, it's all beat up and maybe it's missing an eye and it's, ripped open here or there. It's got character. And I pulled up this poem. It's, or an excerpt from a poem titled The Velveteen Rabbit. And I'll just read a few sentences here. So it says, "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out. You get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." Just like, and we get beat up, right? Like that's what life does. And you get old and you have physical scars and you have battle stories and you have nicks and bruises and scrapes and whatnot, and you're not as you know young and fresh and pretty as you were when you were like a kid or a teenager or in your 20s like we are. Um but that's beautiful. And I love talking to old people for that reason, because there's just so much wisdom there. There's so much life experience. And to hear people look back on life with that perspective, kind of on the other side, maybe even closer to death, I think is really beautiful. And I get really sad when I talk to old people sometimes because I think, man, they don't have a lot of time left. And how grateful or how lucky am I to have all this time in front of me. But it's also beautiful when maybe you don't have a lot of time because there's this pressure on you to just a good pressure to just soak in every single moment of life. So all that is to say, I agree with you. The human condition is beautiful. It's not pretty, it's not easy, but it is beautiful. So with that being said, Mike, there are people listening to this podcast. There are people in the Project Endure community, and I hope people outside of the community who are finding this podcast, listening to us, maybe something you said resonated, something I said resonated, or both. but the person is going through a tough time, whether they put themselves there or they just found themselves there and they're not sure what to do, where to go, or how to even feel. And you get to talk to that person right now as if they're sitting across the table from you. What would you say to them?
Before I speak to whoever needs to potentially hear this message, I just want to say the positivity and the energy that I personally try to feel and express, right? It's more of a mindset that I always want to tailor and always look at because it's such a better way of living. It's such a lighter way of living. And that's not to say that people that have this mindset or people that are similar to like how I embrace life don't go through tough times. It's just I'm gonna see the beauty in it. Um, so I don't I don't like to be married to my ideas, but at this current version of Mike, I solely only I think believe in three things. So I believe in the power of community. I believe that if you surround yourself with people who want similar things, like the ones in Project Endure and like things that you enjoy, a lot of things can get done and you can learn a lot from the power of community. Second thing is that I believe in the power of the individual. I believe the individual is so powerful and they don't understand it. Um, just talking with you, I believe in you, Joe. I believe in your mission. I believe in who you are. Um, and that in itself and that belief and hope gives me hope. And the third thing that I believe in, that I think is the most important thing, is I believe in myself. There is not something more important that I believe in than myself because there were a lot of people in my life growing up that helped indirectly. But if it wasn't for me taking action and taking accountability for what I wanted, I don't know where I would be today, but I could be in sitting in the seat talking to a microphone um on a what is it today? Thursday? Long week, Joe. And I embrace the confidence that I possess and that I have learned to have. I'm comfortable looking at myself in the mirror. It may not be pretty all the time, but I'm so comfortable with addressing and looking at that. And that took such a long time to get to that point. And there's room for improvement, like always, but you have to believe in yourself because more than likely than not, I can guarantee that somebody does too. Somebody truly does. And don't think otherwise because somebody does.
So believe in community, believe in the individual, as in other people, and believe in yourself. And like most of the things we talk about on this podcast, not just this episode, but all the episodes, it's a lot easier to talk about these things than to put them into practice. And what I will say on the community point is one of the reasons I created Project Endure is because I wanted a place where people could go and find other people who were struggling with similar things, who had been through similar things, who wanted similar things, and where we could all grow better together. And so if you're listening to this podcast, you know, reach out to me, reach out to Project Endure, reach out to Mike. And I promise you won't be disappointed, especially if you reach out to Mike. And Mike, if people do want to reach out, if they want to follow along with your running journey, your life journey, if they want to connect and have a conversation, or they just want to see what you're all about or see what you look like. Honestly, when like I put the cover photo on there for the podcast episodes, it's just one photo. I on a personal level, I always am curious about podcast guests when I listen to an episode. So I do that thing where I go on Instagram, I look them up and I scroll through their page. So if you want to do that for Mike, Mike, where should people go?
Thank you for that, Joe. The best way to contact me is through Instagram, Mike Zocco, just plain and simple. I'm on other platforms, but I think at the current time, that's the best way to connect. I just want to double down on that space, a space that I just truly enjoy and feel comfortable at the moment being authentically Mike and open. But I appreciate you, Joe. I think the biggest thing for me interacting with the Project Endure community is, like you said before, is even on social media, who you connect and interact with, it rubs off. It does. I think it's more impactful in person, but obviously, that's impossible given everybody else's directions in life. But I thought for the longest time that the way people operate online like this didn't exist, and I think for a while I was having trouble finding like that connection, that community, that the same craziness or frequency that I possess. But there are a lot of people out there that do, and in Project Endure, there are a lot of like-minded individuals that are also uniquely really different that we can all learn from. And just if you want to have intentional conversations, real, raw, vulnerable conversations, check out Project Endure. And like I said, and Joe, what Joe said before, reach out to, reach out to an individual, reach out to somebody.
One of my favorite parts about this podcast and just about the community is, it's not the biggest community out there. It's not the most well-established community out there. If you're looking for something out on the internet, there are so many options. The thing that warms my heart is, without fail, when somebody comes on the podcast, I'll get a message, the guest will get a message. And I'm saying a message, it's really messages. And then weeks later, I see people connecting. I see, guests from 10 weeks ago is connecting with these 5 people in the community who they didn't know each other before. I see comments on posts. I see pictures in real life. I get to hear about conversations that were impactful that happened offline. And it's so powerful. And I would say very few things make me happier than when good people connect with good people. And so if you're listening to this episode, Mike is good people. Mike is great people. And if you've listened to any episode, reach out. If somebody speaks words into your life that connect with you, tell them. In general, and this is a tangent, and I'll wrap it up here. If you have something nice to say to somebody, if somebody impacted you in a positive way, don't hold that inside. Tell that person, because you never know what that person needs. You never know how your words can impact that person in a positive way and what relationship could blossom out of a compliment, out of a connection, even if it's online. So I think that's all I have to say. Mike, do you have any parting words here?
I just want to say thank you, Joe, and thank you for creating the space for people to be vulnerable. All of the guests in the past and also the ones to come. This space is super unique, and I'm grateful for it. And I can't wait to see what the next 5-10 years brings in my life and your journey, as well as Project Endure.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Endure podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Endure Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you. I can edit this out. I actually do want to try. Now, we're still recording. I've got zero clue if this is going to make it into the podcast. I've always wanted to do a mic drop. We're recording on a different microphone than I usually record on. So this one is free. I'm going to drop this on the desk and we'll see what it sounds like. This might not make it in. I don't.